Welcome to Closer to Venus. I'm Johnny Burke. Today's guest is Dr. Yvonne Kason, a 5-time near-death experiencer, president and co-founder of Spiritual Awakenings International, past president of IANDS, and the author of Touched by the Light, Exploring Spiritually Transformative Experiences. Yvonne, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Johnny.
Now, you have quite a bit of experience. Was it 4 or was it 5 near-death experiences?
It was actually 5 near-death experiences. And part of that confusion was, for many years, I did not realize that I'd had 2 as a child. So as a kid, you don't have a yardstick to measure experiences against. It's just what happened to you, right? So I didn't realize really until a few years ago that I'd had 2 in my childhood. And I had 3 that I'm very aware are near-death experiences in my adult life.
I've heard that actually a few times with some people that have come on to the show where they had them very early on and then they have another one and then they kind of make the connection. Often they don't know what it is. Now, I spoke to someone, his name was Bob Frank, who told me that the average time between the event and when people actually disclose it, tell their friends and family, is actually 10 years. And often it's because they don't know what it is.
Yeah.
Or they're afraid.
Yeah, that is very, very true. That was even true of my first adult near-death experience that happened in 1979. I want to tell you a little bit about that, and then I can explain how I didn't know what it was. I didn't even have a word to describe it. I actually was searching after it, trying to find a word to describe it. And for many years, the best word I was able to find to describe that experience, it happened in a plane crash, was the mystical experience that happened to me in the plane crash, because that was the best words I was able to find. Now that I've been researching the field for many years as a doctor and as an experiencer, I know it was a near-death experience. What happened to me that day was March 27th, 1979. I was a young medical doctor and I was assigned on a medevac on an airplane. This was a twin propeller airplane called a Piper Aztec. It was in Northern Ontario, Canada, and we flew into a winter storm, and they say the air filters froze over on the engine, so the plane engines, first one, then the other stalled, so we had no engines, and we crashed down to the ground. The pilot heroically managed to avoid crashing on trees, got us over the surface of a semi-frozen lake, and we sort of skidded across the surface of the ice. We would have been okay, but as soon as the plane came to a stop, the weight of the plane broke the ice and it sank into very deep water. So I had to swim a really long distance to the closest shore. They say it was about 200 yards, and it was through black, open water with a really strong current in the middle of a blizzard, and I was wearing heavy winter clothes. And so I went down underwater several times. I was kicking with all my strength to get my mouth above water again to be able to get some air, and then I would keep, struggling to swim to shore. Anyway, that was the physical part of it. What happened, the paranormal part of it was, as soon as both of the engines had stopped and the plane was, being buffeted and coming down to the ground, I knew we were crashing. It's quite obvious it was really bad air turbulence, like the worst air turbulence you've ever been in is what it's like when a plane's crashing in a storm. And my instant reaction was fear, intense fear and panic. And I remember at that moment of intense fear and panic, when I realized we were crashing, was all of a sudden from my heart, I didn't think of it. It was almost like a reflex came out of my heart. Came the thought, oh God, help, I'm going to die. I didn't say it out loud, but that's literally what I thought in that panic and fear. And then it was at that moment that my experience began, what I now know was a near-death experience. And I'm pointing this out because it actually started before the plane had crashed, when I was facing my death. And what happened was all of a sudden this force field of peace started descending upon me, and it actually felt like it was pushing down my fear. And it was being replaced by this incredible feeling of peace and calm. And then I heard a voice in my mind. And before this time, I had not ever heard inner voices. And I heard this voice in my mind. It seemed like a male voice say, "Be still and know that I am God.
Wow.
I am with you now and always. And those words just had such a powerful vibration. It just penetrated my soul. And I was no longer afraid. And I was totally at peace. The plane crash landed, skidded across the ice and then rapidly sank. I managed to get out of the plane. I tried to get the patient out, but was unable to before the plane nosedived into really deep water. And the pilot, the nurse, and I, we were in the open water, and the voice repeats in my head, swim to shore. So I started swimming to shore. And like I said, I went down several times trying to swim to shore in the struggle. And then all of a sudden, partway to shore, I heard this sort of loud inner roaring noise, like the roar of a waterfall. I felt myself, my point of perception suddenly was no longer in my body. It was like I was 20 or 30 feet above my body looking down. But it wasn't that straightforward because I wasn't dead, right? Like my body was still swimming to shore. So it was actually like my consciousness was at two places at the same time. That like a split screen TV, how you have the big image and the little image. So the little image, the small part of my consciousness was still in my body, but the big image, most of my consciousness was now above my body. And then I went higher and I went into this realm that was filled with love and light. It was this incredible, powerful, unconditional love, the most perfect love and most powerful love I had ever felt. For an instant, I saw a face of light, and then it sort of faded into the periphery. The periphery was like sort of soft, white, glistening clouds. And I knew things. Like I didn't hear somebody talking to me or see somebody talking to me. I just somehow knew things when I was in this realm of light. And I knew somehow that this love that I was feeling was the love of our higher power, or what I had been raised as a Christian. I had been raised to call it God. But it was not anything at all like what I had been taught God was supposed to be like. It was completely different. What I was experiencing, our higher power, what I call God, was that it is like a universal force, and that it is unconditionally loving. It's not an old man with a long white beard sitting on a throne judging us, right? Not, which is what I'd been taught. No, it wasn't that at all.
I kind of figured that.
Yeah. It was this universal force that is like penetrating, underlying all of creation, that is infinitely intelligent, infinitely present, infinitely powerful. The love, loves each and every one of us so perfectly. I felt like I was home. It felt like everything was perfect and I was home. And somehow I also knew that what I think of as me would live on, whether or not my physical body lived down there. And so I really didn't care. It's like watching a grade B movie on TV where you really don't care how it ends, but I'm going to watch it because I want to see how they made it end, right? That was with that kind of detachment. I was watching what was happening to my body down below because I was in such bliss and such joy, feeling such love, such peace. My body, through a whole series of coincidences, which I won't get into. If people want to hear about all of the miracles and coincidences that led to my rescue, I write about it in my book, Touched by the Light, that I think you mentioned at the very beginning. I go into a lot more detail about both the accident and the story. But anyway, through a whole series of coincidences, there happened to be a helicopter nearby that day, and an overhead plane happened to pick up our message. We were down, so could give the locations. We were rescued by these helicopter pilots, flown to the closest hospital. I remember watching from above as the helicopter landed on the driveway of the hospital, and they put me on one of the stretchers and wheeled me into the emergency department. When my consciousness re-entered my body was when they resuscitated me, and I was resuscitated by rewarming my body because I was almost frozen to death. I was hypothermic. I was a near drowning and a hypothermia victim when I went into the emergency. They put our bodies in the hot water in the physiotherapy department in the whirlpool baths, and it was there that I felt my consciousness re-enter my body. And what that felt like was like whoosh. It was like what they depict when a genie's being sucked into a bottle. It was like I had been in this big expansive space above my body, and then suddenly it seemed through the top of my head I was sucked into the small confines of my body. And then I knew I was back. I knew I was going to live. I remember rubbing my frozen hands against my legs saying, I'm back, I'm back. I'm going to live, I'm going to live. So that is what happened to me. After this happened, it really impacted me. It really changed me. I'm really glad I had to take some time off work afterwards because of my really severe frostbite and the water in my lungs to clear, because I needed some time to sort of integrate what had happened to me. This was profoundly transformative. I'd never had any experience in my life that has such a deep impact on me.
That was the first one?
That was my first adult one. Okay.
So how is that similar or different? Because you had 2 in your childhood?
Yes, I did.
Right. And then you had obviously more.
In my adult life, yeah.
If you could tell us more about the similarities and the differences.
Yeah, okay, will do. So I have to talk about the impact briefly, then I'll go to the similarity and the differences.
All right.
Because the impact is also different of the other ones. So this one, number one, I came back and I was so filled with love. It was like some of that love stuck with me when I came back, and I was just oozing love afterwards. And I just wanted to tell people that I loved them. I actually phoned up my father, who I had been feuding with for many years. We hadn't been speaking. And I said, Dad, I love you. Let's be friends. And we made amends, and we ended up having a really great, loving relationship for them until they died 7 years later. And I look at that as one of the blessings I got out of that it was not my father that had changed. It was me that had changed. That stuff that was so important to me before all of a sudden was just stuff. It was unimportant. What was important was the love. And secondly, my religious or spiritual views changed dramatically after this experience. I became way more tolerant of people with different religious views than my own, because I understood from my experience that there's one higher power, one reality behind the universe, no matter what name we happen to call it, or from what culture or religious tradition we are understanding it. It's the same one truth. It's like climbing the mountain from a whole bunch of different angles. You have different perspectives when you're near the bottom, but once you get to the peak at the top, it's like, oh, it's the same one peak for all of us, right? And I just knew that. And I also completely lost my fear of death. And then afterward, I started having psychic experiences, which we now know is an after effect of near-death experiences. But a couple weeks after I came out of the plane crash, all of a sudden, one day I had my first clairvoyant experience. And I saw my friend's brain, one of my friends. I had a mental image of my friend's brain covered in pus. And to me, as a medical doctor, somehow I knew it was this one particular friend. How I knew, I don't know, but I did. And also I knew what the symbol was. I was really clear. It was meningitis. And sure enough, she was diagnosed later that day with meningitis. So that was my first of many clairvoyant, clairaudient, clairsentient experiences that started happening after this plane crash, near what I now know is a near-death experience. But back then, when I asked people, an NDE person who thought they were an expert said, were you clinically dead when you had this experience? And I went, well, no, I think maybe I was unconscious at one point, but I was never dead. And they said, did you see a tunnel with a light at the end? And I went, no. And so then he said, this is not a near-death experience. So I didn't know what it was. And that's looping back to what you said about people not coming out and not talking about it and not knowing what it is. I at least had thought to ask somebody, could it be a near-death experience? But I was told no. And then I asked my doctor friends, because I was a practicing physician already at that time, had anybody heard of anything like this? And everybody had their hallucination theory that it was hallucination because of a low blood sugar, or a hallucination because of an electrolyte imbalance. So I learned really quick that there wasn't a safe place to talk about it, that nobody was honoring it. So I really was a closet experiencer. I was in the closet for about 10 years. For me, it was about 10. Yeah.
It seems to me that there are several different types of NDEs. And if you have that feeling of how you described complete peace and lack of fear as you knew that you were basically hurtling towards your death. I get what that one person said, were you clinically dead? He's basically going down a checklist, and there's some credence to that, but this would bring up the obvious question of NDEs and samadhi.
Yeah.
There's other different states that you can reach the same state of peace is what you're talking about.
Well, I've now been researching near-death experiences and other types of spiritually transformative experiences for 40 years, very much propelled by this. I want to remember, too, that I've not yet answered your question about my childhood NDEs, because I do want to get to that point. When I started looking to understand this 1979 experience, when I was a young doctor, actually the best description I could find was in yoga. And you mentioned the word samadhi, which basically means a mystical experience in yoga. And there are many types of mystical experiences. There's not just like one type of mystical experience.
Right.
And
we want to know about all of them.
Yeah. Yes. So that when I was searching, I actually found the best explanation for what I had experienced was that it was a samadhi, that it was a mystical experience, that it started with an out-of-body experience. Now I have words for that. So when I went out of body, but then when I went into that state of love and felt that profound love and knew that all that knowledge that came to me all at once, these are definitely features of a samadhi or a mystical experience. So that was why I called it a mystical experience in the plane crash. For many years, as I researched it more myself and more people told me the stories over the years, I actually approached a fairly famous NDE researcher, Dr. Kenneth Ring, and I told him, me being young and a little bit bold, I said, I think you guys are wrong. I don't think you have to be clinically dead to have a near-death experience.
Here we are laughing about it. It's
I know.
Incredible.
At the time, I was pretty gutsy to do that. But I said, I thought they were wrong. I said, I think you can have one of these experiences triggered when you're facing death, when you think you're about to die, or if you're close to death, like me when I was hypothermic, near frozen. And then Ken Ring burst out laughing because by then, of course, 12 years had passed. And he said, Yvonne, you're right. We've now realized you don't have to be clinically dead to have a near-death experience.
On that note, someone recently told me, since we're talking about somatic experiences, I believe it's also called conscious death. Am I right?
Conscious death is yet another thing, because I also had that. I had that in my second adult near-death experience.
Okay, all right. We're getting closer.
Shall we go there, or do you want to hear about my childhood ones? We still didn't go to the childhood ones.
Yes. Yes and yes.
Okay, let me go to the childhood one first because that's your older question. Then we'll go to the conscious death. I'm really glad you asked that because my next NDE in 1995, that was a conscious death. So when I was a child, let me tell you what happened to me when I was a child. I'll just give you a very brief version of the stories that I now realize were near-death experiences. But I never realized that till a few years ago. I just figured it was what happened to me when I was a kid, right? I didn't label it as anything unusual. So the first one happened when I was 5 years old, and it was the summer before kindergarten. I was traveling with my parents in Europe, and I was at a train station. This was new for me, and I was born and raised in Canada, and we don't travel by train very much here. In Europe, they travel by train a lot. So it's sort of exciting for me as a little kid. I was looking around. I saw a station hand jump off the platform, and he jumped down onto the tracks, and he ran across, and then he climbed up to the next platform. So as a little 5-year-old, I thought, oh, that looks like fun. I'm going to do that too. So I leaned forward to jump onto the tracks. And then all of a sudden, it was like time stood still. Like my body's like 45 degrees out. And all of a sudden, I went out of body. And it was like my life was a motion picture and the picture had frozen at that frame. So it had frozen, everything stopped, except my brain was still working. And when I was out of body, maybe 20 feet or so above where my body was, I could see from that angle, I could see what was coming in at the train station. And I remember thinking, oh, I'm about to be hit by a train. Because I hadn't looked. There was a train rapidly coming into the station, and I was jumping in front of a rapidly oncoming train. I had absolutely no fear at all. And then out of nowhere, suddenly the movie of my life started again, and a hand came from the platform and whisked me back up onto the platform. And then the train came in right in front of me. It did not hit me. And of course, my parents were scolding me and everything like that.
So whose hand was that?
I don't know. Must be some other person at the station. I didn't see them, but I'm guessing it was some other physical person. I was physically pulled out of the way of the train. But I remember so very clearly that in kindergarten, I started kindergarten shortly afterwards, and I made some new friends, telling one of my little new friends, I can fly, because as a 5-year-old, that's how I understood the out-of-body experience. I thought I could fly. And I remember this friend laughing at me saying, there's no way you could fly. And I had such a clear memory of what I thought was flying, when I was wide awake. I said, yeah, sure I can. I remember I climbed up on the fence in front of my house and I stretched out my arms and I jumped off and I thought I'd be able to fly down the street and show my friend. And of course, I fell to the ground. I couldn't fly. And my friend laughed and ran off. And I remember this so clearly because I was confused. I was puzzled. I couldn't figure it out because I so clearly remembered what I thought was flying. And Now I realize it was an out-of-body experience when I was close to death, which is the out-of-body type near-death experience is one type of the near-death experience. The mystical or samadhi type is another type of near-death experience. And some have a combination of both, the out-of-body and the samadhi. So this one as a kid was an out-of-body type.
So how many different types are there?
3. In my work, when I describe near-death experiences, I was president of IANDS for a while, and I've been researching this for 40 years. I break near-death experiences into 3 main types. So the first type is the out-of-body type, and a lot of people have that. They might be above their body watching the doctors trying to resuscitate them, or they might go over the next room and they see their relatives crying in the next room or whatever, but they're out of body and viewing things that are later verified they actually happened on the physical plane, things that was impossible for them to see from the vantage point of their body. So it seemed like their spirit was above their body or moving around their body. That's the out-of-body type of near-death experience. And both of my childhood NDEs, because my next one, which I haven't told you yet, age 11, it was also an out-of-body type. But then there's the second type. We call that the deeper type of near-death experience. It might start with an out-of-body experience, but then it transitions into a mystical experience or a samadhi. And this is where people see beings of light, the spirits of departed loved ones, this white light realm. They might have a life review. They might learn spiritual lessons. That's all happens as part of the mystical experience component of the white light mystical type of near-death experience. And these are the type of NDEs that are the most transformative. Just like when people have a samadhi or mystical experience in other ways, because you don't have to be near death to have a mystical experience. It can happen when you're meditating. It can happen to you as a gift of grace. It can happen to you in various circumstances, looking at a beautiful sunset.
Which proves your point that you made earlier when you said to the famous researcher, I think you're wrong. I don't think you need to be clinically dead. Here we are laughing about it again. It's incredible. Yeah. I always thought that was a good point because the more I talk to people about this, there's several different types. And then there's the Kundalini awakening, which we'll get to.
We'll get to that later. That's a type of spiritually transformative experience. And Kundalini does sometimes awaken during a near-death experience as well. That's something that I've researched over the years.
This should be like mandatory electives when kids go to school, I think.
Hopefully one day.
Hopefully one day it will be. Maybe not next week, but that just occurred to me now.
Yeah, that's awesome. I agree. I think in future we do need to really just inform people so they know what it is. And rather than being burned at the stake as a witch or being told you're a heretic or told now it's mental illness, you're crazy, you're hallucinating, that these are very, very real experiences of consciousness that happen to people. And near-death experiences are only one of the types. So you're mentioning some of the other types. Samadhis can be in a near-death experience, or they can be when you're meditating or spontaneously, other circumstances. Similarly, Kundalini awakening can happen during a near-death experience. That's true. I found that. But it can also happen most commonly triggered by meditating. This is when people get Kundalini awakenings or sometimes Shakti transmission from a saint will awaken the Kundalini. So the third type of near-death experience is categorized very loosely as the distressing near-death experience. These are ones that rather than people finding themselves going to, this beautiful realm of light or just hovering around their body, they actually find themselves going to some dark and scary places where there are maybe tormenting entities with foul language, or that they're actually experiencing physical pain, discomfort. In the yogic tradition, we've talked about this before, it's understood that in consciousness, that there are many planes, there are many astral planes, and it's sort of like there's a drink, it's called something like a B52 or something like that, where they have all these different liqueurs and liquors of different densities. So the denser ones sink at the bottom, the ones that are in between are layers in the middle, and then the lightest ones are up at the top. But it's sort of like that in consciousness, that the highest and light-filled astral planes, those are called the astral heavens. And that's where you want to go. That is the ideal place to go in between, is the highest astral planes that are filled with the saints and the beings of light. But you can go just to our astral plane. So people who are out of body, having an out of body experience, they haven't gone up, they've gone sideways. They're out of body, but they're in our astral plane. But similarly, you can go out of body and go down to some lower astral planes. According to yoga and Buddhism, it's hypothesized. I think that that's what happens to people who have these distressing near-death experiences, is that they've actually gone to some of these lower planes. But the good news is this, is that if you turn to spirit, I've heard of 2 cases now, people who've had very distressing, they went to a very dark place when they left their body. They were both people who were active atheists, and they refused to pray, and I don't believe in this crap, whatever. But when they were in this dark realm, the thought occurred to them, maybe I should pray. Maybe there'd be nothing to lose. And then they started praying. And then actually what happened is they started rising out of this realm, and then a beam of light comes and takes them and lifted them up into the white light realm. Pastor Howard Storm is one of the famous cases I mention in my book, Touched by the Light. I give that case of somebody who started off at the dark realm, but by praying, he ended up in the white light realm and had his life totally transformed by the experience in the white light realm, and became a pastor afterwards, whereas before he was a real loudly outspoken atheist.
Take note, folks. All right, we're going to warn you. It's very interesting about the dark NDEs. I've talked to one person that had that experience, and I'm not really sure what type of people go there, because it obviously raises the question, when people do bad things, they cause harm to others, do they automatically go there, or is there some kind of karmic debt to settle? I'm not really sure how that works.
Having been on the other side 5 times and in the white light 3 times, we've only talked about once so far, I have profound, deep knowing of the incredible wisdom of the power behind the universe. And it's sort of like an ant trying to understand Einstein's theory of relativity is us trying to understand God's plan. It's like so complex that it's beyond our capacity to understand. People try to, and people have theories, and they've written books with all their theories and stuff. What I can say from my own personal experience is what resonates with me as true, based on what I've actually experienced on the other side, is what the yogis have talked about, who've been studying consciousness for thousands of years by going deep into meditation, which is that our souls are immortal, that wherever it is that we go in the between life, it is the between life. We reincarnate. We come back lifetime after lifetime after lifetime in order for our souls to learn and grow. In fact, in my most recent near-death experience, when I was in the light, it happened in 2003, I had this experience where I went into a state after being in the white light realm and feeling all that love and seeing the saints and the beings of light and everything, and it being explained to me that I had died. That I went into a state where I wasn't seeing things anymore. There was no visual images, but I was knowing things. I was able to absorb vast amounts of information all at once, like massive downloads, right? They're just massive amounts of information all at once. And in that massive amount of information that I was receiving, I remembered, like I had no longer forgotten all my past lives. It was like an aha experience, because suddenly my life I had just had as Dr. Yvonne Kason made sense in the context of all my past lives.
What you were in the past. I've always been curious about that. How could you not be curious about how you lived before? So you remembered all of your past lives.
And all fit together like all the pieces of a jigsaw puzzle being put together. Because before that, after my 1979 NDE, one of my psychic abilities that opened up was my ability to see my own and other people's past lives. So that experience for me was I had certain pieces of a jigsaw puzzle, right? So I knew certain things about my past. But when I was on the other side, it was like all the pieces were put together and I could see the whole picture of the completed puzzle. And it was like, aha, that's how it all fits together. It was so perfect. I saw how in the infinitely complex divine plan, it's like going to school. There's the subject of English, there's the subject of math, there's the subject of science, and maybe you're really advanced in English, but you're behind in science, or you're advanced in music and you're behind in math, or whatever. Whatever your particular soul needs in the school of life, that you will be given those experiences over and over again to help you. But things carry on from lifetime to lifetime. So one of the things I saw, guess what? This is not my first incarnation having near-death experiences, Kundalini awakening, because I had a Kundalini awakening in 76. I'd had these in past lifetimes too. And so it made sense to me. Oh, no wonder I'm this way this lifetime, because I carried this with my soul from past lives. And you, for example, are a musician. I mean, it's possible that you've been a musician in past lives. And that's something you come in with, and these young children who you see, they're 3 years old and they're playing the piano like they're a concert pianist. That's probably something they're bringing in from a past life, that somehow the memory of that has carried with them. So there's a lot of that I saw with past lives. And similarly, we recognize people, and we may not recognize people.
I was just about to ask you that. I'm dying to ask you this. Who did you know that you know now?
Past lives? Many. Because I'm so aware of many of my past lives, many people that I know in this current lifetime, I'm aware of past lifetimes with them.
But have you told them that, though? Are they aware of it, or are you just keeping that
it depends on who the person is. There's some people who are not open to that type of information, so no, I'm not going to tell them, hey, guess what? The same sort of crap we're fighting about this lifetime, we fought about that last time we were together too, that this is a pattern we're repeating. And
there's a hint.
And so I'll just give that as an example, that somebody I had a problematic relationship with earlier on in my life. When I was praying about it and meditating about it, trying to understand, I'm trying to be a spiritual person. I'm trying to lead a good life. Why am I having such problems with person X, right? And then when I was praying and meditating about it, what happened is all of a sudden I started remembering past lives with this person. And I saw, oh my goodness, we've had this kind of problem before. Then I had to shift my learning away from, blaming them. Oh, this person's been a creep for many incarnations. Because guess what? I was shown several incarnations where it went back and forth, where I was actually the one being a little bit on the creepy side, right? And so that it went back and forth, like who was the bad guy and who was the good guy became very blurred. So then I realized, I'm not so perfect either, that maybe what I have to do is take a step back and learn to forgive this person and to forgive myself for not being perfect. And that to accept that this is like a pattern of dynamics, and to walk away in peace, rather than, oh, I'm a victim, or, oh, that person's terrible. But to realize we're both probably a little bit to blame. We're also ready to be the victim, right? The other person's the bad guy and we're the victims. But when you're on the spiritual path, you learn you have to break out of that way of looking at things. And you have to rise above it. We're all spiritual brothers and sisters. We're all learning. And that sometimes you're able to heal relationships that were conflicted in the past. And other times you can't. Other times it's about forgiveness, acceptance and forgiveness. And allowing them to move on with their life, and you moving on with your life, trying to get a place of peace in your heart.
As Edgar Cayce famously said, there are no victims. Since we're talking about reincarnation, this is the question I had. I was told that, quote, our purpose here on earth is to raise the power of Kundalini to the point where we can bypass the reincarnation cycle. Is that a common theory, or is that like a one-off?
I would say that is a partial answer. It is partially correct. That you have to fill in the blanks a little more to understand it more fully. I think what happens is I had the good fortune of meeting Gopi Krishna back in the 70s when I traveled to India. So I've been studying, and he's like the father of Kundalini in the West, in case people don't know who he is. And he was like a mentor to me. I read all of his writings. They're all about Kundalini. And he emphasized that Kundalini was the evolutionary energy in man. And the ancient yogis, Paramahansa Yogananda also talks about this, only in a certain book. It's not very openly disclosed. But the ancient yogic traditions, they talk about Kundalini, that it is this potential mechanism in everybody, not just in the yogis who are meditating in the Himalayas, but everybody has this potential. It is my belief that this is what other spiritual traditions have called by a different name. They might have called it Holy Spirit. I now use the term spiritual energy in my books, spiritual energy or Kundalini.
And you also coined the term spiritually transformative
Yes.
experiences, or as we'll now refer to them as STE. Tell us a little bit about that, and also how you founded Spiritual Awakenings International.
Yes. So Kundalini awakening is one type of spiritually transformative experience. If the Kundalini mechanism awakens, if you manage to awaken it through prayer, meditation, gift of grace, Shaktipat from a spiritual master, according to yoga and many experts, it gives you the possibility to accelerate, to speed up your evolution. So the soul learning that you would have done in maybe 10 lifetimes, you can do in one lifetime. And if you're really working on it, the soul learning you could have done in 20 lifetimes, you can do in one lifetime, etc. Now, this is hard work. It takes psychological work. It takes spiritual effort. It takes spiritual practice. Ultimately, the long-term objective is exactly what your friend said to you, is to break free of the wheel of karma, to break free of the wheel of reincarnation, that once we've learned all our spiritual lessons, we graduate and we don't have to incarnate on this plane anymore. But most people, awakening the Kundalini is only the first step. There's a lot of hard work in the middle before we get to that ultimate point of cosmic consciousness where we've burned off all of our earthly karma. You asked me about spiritually transformative experiences. Yes, I coined that phrase back in 1994 as an umbrella term because it seemed to me, both from my personal experiences, because, hey, I'd had a Kundalini awakening in 1976. I'd had these out-of-body experiences when I was a child. I had this mystical experience in the plane crash. I had a psychic awakening after the plane crash. I was having all these diverse types of spiritual and paranormal experiences, and many people out there are using sort of a stovepipe approach. They're only looking at what's down their stovepipe, just one type of experience, and they weren't seeing that I think they're all connected in some way. They're all connected in consciousness, and according to the yogis, they are all connected in consciousness. They're all part of that evolution of consciousness. It's like what used to be paranormal is now becoming normal as your range of consciousness expands, and this speeds up after you've had a Kundalini awakening. It also speeds up after you've had a white light type of near-death experience. It speeds up if you've had a psychic awakening. And so if all of these things, it speeds up if you've had a mystical experience or samadhi of any type. So if all of these are transforming people in a similar way, they must be connected in some way, I thought. So I came up with this umbrella term to encompass all of it. I call it spiritually transformative experiences.
And the new organization is about bringing all of us together to talk about these type of experiences. So it's a matter of connecting people like us that want to learn with speakers and researchers.
And experiencers. You're going to learn the most from the experiencers, people who are actually experiencing this transformation of consciousness. So Spiritual Awakenings International, I got a powerful download from Spirit about 2 years ago, and so did my good friend Robert Baer. We had actually just met at that point. He's a multiple NDE, multiple STE experiencer as well. We both got this very powerful download independently, but it was the same, that we were being called by Spirit to found a new organization. I was given the name Spiritual Awakenings International, and it would be by experiencers, for experiencers, and for all those who want to support experiencers, right? That it's bringing us together. That was the goal, bringing together experiencers of all these different types of experiences, bringing together scholars and researchers of all these types of experiences and spiritually transformative experiences, and being a safe harbor for experiencers, a place that experiencers can network and meet each other and feel safe, that this is your home. The president and vice president are both experiencers. So in Spiritual Awakenings International, this is the new normal. Having STEs of any type is the normal. I've been amazed, Johnny, because since we launched 10 months ago, Spiritual Awakenings International has just skyrocketed. People from all over the world are signing up. Right now, we have people subscribing from 55 countries on every continent except Antarctica. And to me, what that reflects is this global spiritual awakening is really happening all over the world. People of all cultures, all races. It's not just something in North America or just to people of a particular religious view. It's global. It's happening to everybody.
Excellent. And you're having your first conference next month in June.
That's right. On June 12th and 13th, that's a Saturday and Sunday, we're having our very first Spiritual Awakenings International Conference. It's going to be online. It's free, so everyone's welcome to register and attend. You can register on our Spiritual Awakenings website, which is www.spiritualawakeningsinternational.org. We've got 22 different speakers on a whole array of topics. We're trying to cover the spectrum of STEs. We're not just limited to one type. We have speakers from 6 different countries speaking too. So we're really, really looking forward to that debut. And we're hoping next year to have a live conference. If this pandemic ever ends, we're actually hoping to have it in Florida amongst the palm trees. So we're hoping.
You can have it in my backyard if you want. It's closer to Venus, but I live on Jupiter.
Isn't that awesome?
I'm sure we can find a space somewhere there. So can our listeners find you through spiritualawakeningsinternational.org, or do you have another website?
No, my main website is www.spiritualawakeningsinternational.org. And if you want to send me an email, you can just go to the contact part and you can send me an email there. And also on the website, I have several videos of different talks I've given on different topics. Like one of them was on Kundalini and near-death experiences, something that we talked a bit about today, and more about my near-death experiences. Finally, I want to mention that we're launching a YouTube channel, our Spiritual Awakenings International YouTube channel. We just launched it. People can subscribe to that. And once a month, we have featured speakers. This month, May, we are having Dr. Richard Kelly, who's going to be talking about first responders' experiences where somebody has died, that they're having experiences of the spirit of the deceased person. Nobody talks about that, but they're having them.
I think that your organization is bringing all this to the forefront and talking about all these different things that we don't always talk about, which I think we need to. Excellent. Doctor, thanks so much for joining us. I'm going to put those links in the notes as well. You've been listening to Closer to Venus. I'm Johnny Burke. If you enjoyed today's episode, please consider subscribing. If you really liked it, you can also leave us a review on iTunes. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.